Welcome, everyone, to the Nerd Journey Podcast, episode 18A. That's part one of two for episode 18. We're going to be joining you every week to talk IT career, news, and opinions based on our points of view. I'm your host, John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, joined by my co-host, Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_. Hey, Nick, how's it going?
I'm doing great, John. We are a couple of VMware solution engineers looking to bring you career advice we've been given earlier in our careers. We hope our discussions will be relevant across disciplines and remain timeless. If you're enjoying our content, please drop us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with us, tweet or DM at Nerd Journey. Ultimately, we're just two nerds on a journey.
A journey to virtual enlightenment.
So let's take a trip.
Great, Nick. How was that opening for you?
I liked it. It was good. I mean, I drank coffee before the show as usual, so I'm juiced.
Yeah, I'm a little bit under the weather, but I'm feeling good about it too.
Awesome. Well, maybe once we finish, you can get some rest.
Yeah. Good luck with that. All right. So our topic this week, we have part one of an interview we did with Joseph Griffiths. Joseph is a staff solution architect with VMware, but he's not really on to talk about VMware. He's here to talk about career journey, the same thing we always talk about. So with that in mind, Nick, you actually know Joseph, right? You are the one who actually approached him to come on and do this interview. How do you know him?
Absolutely. I'll be playing the part of Talent Scout this week, but I started listening to the V Brown Bag podcast when I was studying for my VCP a while back, and I listened to one of the recordings done by Joseph and ended up reaching out to him with some questions, and he was very helpful, and found out he was moving down to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I think that was a little over a year ago, and got him involved in a local IT pro networking group called SpiceCore here, and he's done some very good talks for that, and based on that, I thought he'd make a great candidate for our podcast. But you know what? I won't give too much more away, John, because I need to let everybody build up a little bit of suspense for the goodness they're about to hear. So let's get to the interview.
And we are joined by Joseph Griffiths, who is a staff solution architect at VMware, one of our colleagues. Thank you very much for making the time, Joseph.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Nick.
So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about actually right off the bat is that solution architect role. Nick and I both have solution engineer titles, and I think there's probably a lot of confusion out there what the different titles mean and what they do. So maybe you could talk about that solution architect role a little bit and what the solution architect does.
Absolutely. I'm happy to do so. So at VMware, solutions architect is a little bit different than a lot of other organizations. The primary role of a solutions architect at VMware is to identify business problems and help come up with innovative solutions to solve those business problems and assure that our customers get the outcome that they are looking for to solve those business problems. So, instead of thinking about how do I solve provisioning, I think about what does provisioning do to drive revenue, or can it drive revenue, or is it really a cost play? And I start to help our customers up-level their conversation with their bosses and their managers in a way that allows them to do cooler things and innovate and really drive business results for a company.
Cool. So how do you see that contrasting with the solution engineers that you interact with on a regular basis?
It's a really good question. So as I think about it, if we think about the different roles, there's the engineer and there's the architect, right? Traditionally, in any business we deal with, an architect is someone who understands the business outcomes and tries to architect solutions to meet the business outcomes, where a engineer is someone who takes those specifications that come from the architect and implements them, builds them, and makes sure the engineer. So we've got a difference in understanding and direction of where one is far more deeply technical, which is the engineer side, and one of them is a more high level business. Now, I will say, at VMware, we understand the need that everything needs to be driven from a business perspective. So our engineers are also becoming business focused and making sure they get those outcomes, while the architects are looking to build architectures that help solve those, that each of the engineers can execute on.
one place where you find a lot of architects and engineers is VMworld, and I have a story about that I'd like to share. I'd like you guys to go back with me. Go back in your minds. The year was 2007. The event, VMworld. A large technology stage, plenty of vendors, a lot of good information to take in, smart presenters. And I imagine a young Joseph Griffiths, unsure of his place in the world, ready to make that next move. And, I would finish the story, but I'm going to let Joseph tell it a little bit better because I think that was a turning point for you, Joseph. Could you speak to that a little bit for us?
Yeah. Honestly, guys, I feel a little bit like Luke Skywalker, and you're about to hand me a lightsaber here. Good intro, though, Nick. I appreciate it. So this is an interesting story. You can read a little bit more about it on my blog. But basically, at that point, I was a systems administrator for a mid-sized company, and I got to attend VMworld. It was more than anything just a perk from my employer. Good employee, go to VMworld, enjoy the conference. And I went there to learn. And I sat down in rooms with Carl Eschenbach and other people at the time who were leading VMware. And I got to the vision of what they were trying to achieve. And it was so different than what I had understood my job to be, because at that point, my job had been very much keep the lights on. And they were talking about cloud, and they were talking about future things. They were talking about innovation. And they honestly inspired me. And suddenly I realized, there's so much more I could be doing with IT, and there's so much of a wider world out there, and I've been living in a little box for a long time, and I really need to get outside of that box, and I need to make myself a little bit more marketable to these people so that I can have opportunities to do really exciting and interesting and innovative things instead of constantly protecting and keeping up servers and building Linux operating systems and Solaris OSs, which is what I was doing back then. So it really was a huge eye-opener and a pivot point for me, and I decided, well, in order to do that, I've got to go get some certifications, because how do I stand out against 10,000 other applicants? There's nothing really remarkable. I didn't go to Harvard, and I didn't go to some great school that just stands out right there off the top of my head. I went to a great college, but it doesn't stand out on my resume. So at the end of the day, I realized that the thing that I've got to do is go grab certifications, because that at least gets me to the top of the stack, and then I can do the rest with my ability to speak and do in front of the people in the interview. But I got to get through the filtering process first. So that drove me on a pretty hyper path of certification for a while there.
That's so interesting. Now, was it difficult to change your mindset when you were met with these, you might just say, difference of opinions, or something different than maybe you had been focused on before?
Well, I think that mindset change depends on the person that you are, right? I think that some people can hear ideas, internalize them because they go on the same journey, at least mentally, and then apply them in their lives and do really well. And then I think some people are afraid to internalize those, or think that maybe they know better. I've never been a person like that. I always approach everything from the aspect that everybody has different life experiences, and because of the differences in their life experiences, they have a unique way of looking at the world, and their perspective is incredibly valuable. So when I listen to people, I listen honestly to understand their perspective and gain wisdom from it. And so I was able to take the ideas and say, those ideas are solving a lot of the problems. I mean, they were talking about private clouds in 2007. So those were solving a lot of the problems I had day to day back then, huge problems that I was facing. And so for me, it was pretty easy to go, yeah, I'm going to go build that. I'm going to go start doing that. And those are the kind of things that I want to be doing. I don't want to be, rolling Solaris operating systems for the rest of my life. It really wasn't what I wanted to be doing with my career. So I guess it really depends on your own personal mindset and your approach to learning. I think it becomes easy for all of us as we start to get good at what we're doing, that we can get kind of prideful and not willing to learn. And I think that's super dangerous. So I guess if I could say any inflection point comes from it, we all need to stand back and say, we still got a lot to learn.
John, I bet you have an opinion on this.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's so interesting to hear that your vision of what the company was doing was challenged, as opposed to, it's. Let me back up. my mind's racing with that, right? I think that a lot of times people put the company that we work for in kind of a box and say, that organization does this. And I definitely paint other organizations with a broad brush. Oh, that's the company that does that. And it's it's kind of like a blinders on about the intricacies and vision that other organizations have. So it's really interesting to hear that not only was your thoughts about the organization challenge, but you actually, pursued and took on that challenge and made a big change in your life.
Yeah, there was a fair amount of change that came out of that experience. I mean, I immediately went back and became an advocate for building a proper private cloud. And the interesting thing about that is once I started really becoming an advocate for it, I found that there were other champions in the company who were interested in doing the same thing. And ultimately that pivoted us into a position from being a single provider of IT services to being a multi-tenant cloud provider for a number of organizations. And that was a journey we went on mostly because I was championing that and driving it through from a technology standpoint. Ultimately that particular effort, it kind of failed. And the reason it failed was because I didn't comprehend the people and process changes necessary. I was only focused on the technology, right? I went and built the best private cloud I could. But when it came down to how much are we going to charge people and can we charge people, I hadn't validated those things, right? And so it became an epic failure. Things like capacity planning and planning ahead for capacity wasn't something I thought of back then. So it became a failure. It was really an immature private cloud, but it taught me a lot, right? And we really tried to do it, and it set me up for my next success in building a more mature cloud that I was working on for the next company I went to. And those are the way we learn things. For me, I learned through doing the journey and living through the journey, and I have to experience it to be able to learn from it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I also wonder the part that the certification track and the certification training played in that. Because you mentioned that it was a way that you felt that you had to stand out from the crowd when you were maybe looking for new opportunities. But did it actually help you in that journey of advancing the maturity of the internal private cloud offering?
Yeah. So I'll answer that a little bit differently than the way you asked, because I think that what you're getting at is actually really important, which is, does the journey of trying to achieve certifications teach you things that are valuable in your career? And the answer to that emphatically is yes. When I started on the path at the time, I wanted to become more VMware centric. Selfishly, back then, my desire was my Linux operating systems keep going down. I want to move into a job that has some sort of availability built in so that I stop getting calls at 3 a.m. VMware looked like it, so I decided to go get a bunch of VMware certifications. And I started at the bottom with the VMware Certified Professional, and that meant I had to go to a training class that I managed to convince my employer to send me to. So I went to it and got educated on it, and I learned a bunch from that. And then, beyond that to what VMware calls the VMware Certified Advanced Professional levels. Those levels, there's one that's a design exam and one that's a hands-on exam. And both of those required me to independently study on my own and learn those topics. For me, the most valuable one was the design one, because I had been stuck in the engineer role for so long, having to move to design and think about requirements, constraints, functional versus non-functional. Architectural concepts actually stretched me quite a bit and taught me a huge amount that I wouldn't be able to do my current job with had I not had those things. So for me, each of those steps really, really pushed me to a point of learning and gaining new knowledge. So I'm kind of a certification nut. And the reason I am is because it gives me a goal to work toward that forces me to learn new things. And that's been really, really a good driver for me in career advancement. And then as a nice side effect to your point, it allowed me to look good on resumes that allowed me to get interviews for jobs that I normally wouldn't have gotten. That is, I fully believe that the only reason I got an interview for VMware as a solutions architect was because of the certifications I was carrying. And then the only reason I got the job was because I was able to sound good when I was talking to people in the interviews, right? So it's both sides of that. It's not just having certifications doesn't equal jobs. You've got to be able to also represent yourself correctly.
That's good. I was actually going to ask if organizations you had been applying for understood the differences in those advanced exams, the difference between the design separate and apart from, the tactical engineering components. Did you have to explain that in any interviews?
So that's an interesting question. So I hold two of VMware's highest level certification, the VMware Certified Design Expert, or the VCDXs. And what I have found is that most people doing interviews are looking for people who have the VMware Certified Advanced Professional and not looking for VCDXs. There's a few companies out there that are looking for VCDXs, VMware being one of them, and a few others out there that are targeting VCDXs. But the number of VCDXs is in the 300 range, so it's a very small population. So I found, for the most part, that particular certification requires a little bit of explanation, unless you come from the technical side of the house and then they know who that is or what that is. So yeah, on the VCDX level, I've had to do some explaining on what that is and how hard that is to get from a certification perspective. At the VCAP level, they understand that to be a little bit higher than VCP, so they usually know what that is at the VMware level.
That makes sense. You mentioned a couple things there. One was, I think maybe rewinding a little bit, was that idea of learning with intent, I think, that you touched on in one of your blog posts. But it's also interesting that in the VMworld, you would be applying for a role and the people wouldn't know what a VCDX was. Did that indicate to you that you were not applying at the right place, maybe?
That's actually, I've never considered that. Thank you for bringing it up. Now that you mention it, yeah, probably. I had never considered it at the time. I think you naturally see job opportunities and you apply for them. After I became a VMware Certified Design Expert, I did get a number of hits on my resume and lots of job opportunities, especially with startups that would be doing business with VMware. Ultimately, I didn't decide to go that route, and ultimately fend off that way. As I think about certifications and this whole, does it benefit you? Is it something that just gets there? The test king kind of shenanigan, which is if I get a certification, it's just so that I can get the job. I like to think of it this way. Early on in my career of trying to become something different than I was at the time, I interviewed for technical account manager jobs at VMware. And I had an interview with Dane Hirschberger, who's a SE up in Michigan, I believe, at this point. And he was doing what we would usually call a personality interview, where he talks to me about my personality, figures out if I'm going to fit right within the team and all that. And it was really interesting because we had a conversation and he really opened my mind to something from a career path. I said, why are you doing the job you're doing right now? Why are you a technical account manager when you used to work in technology? Why are you doing something? And he said, he had a good friend who was the CEO of a company. And he met with his friend. He said, look, I'm like a solutions engineer and you're a CEO. How did you become a CEO? And he said, well, I became a CEO by having a very purposeful career where I chose to do different things. I'd spent 2 or 3 years in different jobs so that I could learn every portion of the company. So by the time I got to the point where I had done a 2 or 3 year tour in every portion of the company, I really understood the company. And I was in a better place to be able to become the CEO of a company because I understood sales. I understood marketing. I understood supply chain. I understood, backline support. I think that that's very true of all of us, is that we have a tendency to get comfortable. And when we're comfortable, we kind of sit back on our laurels and go, it's nice here. It's comfortable. But we've kind of stopped learning at that point. We artificially limit our ability to learn by not making ourselves uncomfortable. My desire with certifications was to constantly push myself, not too much to overload. I set reasonable timeframes, and anyone who's read my blog will understand that I'm a firm believer in set a certain amount of time, like 1 hour a day you're going to spend on that, spend the 1 hour doing it, and then do the other things in your life. not cramming, not slamming, not trying to get it all done at ridiculous times, right? I'm a big fan of moderation and trying to get things done by having a dedication of doing it every day instead of trying to do it all in 1 hour or one day. And so I think that kind of purposeful decision making and forcing yourself to grow is something that's really benefited me in my career and in my life, is that I constantly push myself to be uncomfortable. And I switch jobs when I become comfortable because it becomes boring to me.
Yeah, that's something that I remember saying a bunch of different times, which is if you're comfortable, you're not growing. Like you cannot grow while you're 100% comfortable, right? So you have to be okay with being a little bit uncomfortable. And that's the place where you're growing. So that resonates with me.
I wish it wasn't true. I wish that I was a person who could choose to grow even when I was comfortable. I just haven't found myself to do that. It's a personality problem of mine. Sounds like we share it.
Sounds like a pretty good personality problem to have if it's propelled you both as far as it has. I've met a lot of people who don't have that same personality flaw, if you will. They're not interested in the growth mindset. And it's so interesting how when you're in the day-to-day and fixing problems, putting out fires, how difficult it is to train your mind to step back and look at the situation from a holistic standpoint. Just like you said, Joseph, how all the cogs and wheels of the organization affect what you might be doing and how you might be able to change those with the things you're doing, instead of, I'm just using technology to do these three things and I can't really see outside of that. That seems to be a very large difference maker between the extremely successful IT pro and the person who, just gets to be the better and smarter engineer.
So a story comes to mind that has some value in our conversation right now. When I was 17 years old, I worked for a fast food place that made tacos, Mexican fast food. And my job was to get up at 5:30 in the morning, come in, and I would fry all the taco shells and the chips, the hard taco shells and the chips and the other items. I'd make the fresh salsa, do all the prep work so we could open at 10 in the morning. And it was just me and the manager every morning. And basically I did like 4 hours of the exact same thing, 5 days a week, every day. It was incredibly boring work. And as I thought about it, my thing was to try to figure out how I could more efficiently fry the taco shells so that I could get done sooner from that process, right? That was literally what I spent a lot of my time trying to figure out during those like 3 years that I did that job. So I think that no matter what you're doing, you can find ways to grow and improve what you're doing. It doesn't need to be that you're moving from job to job. I want to be cautious with the thing that there's some sort of ladder that we're all climbing, right? I think that people need to find out what they're passionate about and do that and be really great at what they're doing. I was listening to the radio today and Michelle Obama was talking about, they asked her the question of whether she should run for, or whether she's planning to run for office. And she quite simply said, that's what other people want. You have to be careful with what other people want and with what you want. And she says, I don't want to do that. That's not what I'm passionate about. So, as I think about this, this isn't just about climbing a career ladder. It's about finding something that you're passionate about and doing it great. At that time in my life, I was pretty passionate about frying taco shells for whatever reason. And I was determined to become the best taco frying person I could be. And honestly, the sad thing is I'd probably still be frying taco shells if I could afford to live that way. The pay wasn't great, honestly. It's pretty hard to have an apartment on that. So there were some outside factors that propelled me out of that job, and it was mostly the pay related thing, right? Sad to say at this point. So I always want to be cautious to say, look, if you're the janitor, be the best janitor you can be. There's nothing wrong with that ever, right?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Something that Nick was kind of touching on, I think, was this idea of business orientation. So we as individuals can manage our careers and manage our passions, one of the things that we can do in an operations role is to kind of, I don't know, if we're in a position to influence the organization and how it's structured, different IT organizations are structured different ways. But it seems like, a very typical one is kind of, it's a cost center. It's doing a certain number of things. And you touched on, or maybe it was Nick touched on, being aligned with the business and knowing what it is that the business is doing. I think that's what you were talking about, and kind of managing your career and managing different roles within an organization. But an IT organization can do the same thing, right? The IT organization can be aligned with knowing what it is that sales is trying to do. An IT organization can be aligned with knowing what marketing is trying to do, what the logistics part of the business is trying to do. And by doing that, the IT organization can be a better organization, not just the people within it. Am I off base? Am I just way in the clouds right now? Does that make any sense?
The cloud, just one cloud, John.
There are many clouds, and all of them had value for different reasons. Actually, I would say you're spot on. I like to think of this as a little bit of a journey, guys. So for me, it's important to understand how we got to where we're at and how we can fix where we're at, right? Which is when we first started, IT was basically running some minor functions, doing some stuff that geeks like to do, like number crunching or something like that, right? The old mainframe days. At this point, we had a bunch of smart people who basically did everything, including building the machines and the RAID tubes that went into them, right? And the capacitors they went. Then we got into the client server world that we're in today. And as we got into that world, what we did is we decided that IT has a lot of complexity, infrastructure specifically. So we segregated roles. We created storage people. We created networking people. We created server people. We've now created virtualization people. We've created all of these roles. And this allows us to maintain better consistency, better subject matter expertise, and supposedly improves the quality of our outcome product, right? The biggest problem with this is that it's really, really moved us away from developers who ultimately report to lines of business, who ultimately, hopefully, if you're in a publicly traded company, drive revenue or do the thing that the company ultimately cares about doing. And so at this point, because of the siloed nature of these teams, and then even more siloed within it because a lot of teams are broken into, plan, build, run. So architecture, operations, and engineering being separate roles within each of those silos, we're so far extracted. If you go to the average IT worker and you say, hey, what did you do today that helped your company's revenue? They may not even be able to answer that question. And so I do think that, the demand of the future is for IT shops to become less concerned with the nerd knobs, to use the term of your podcast here, and more concerned with the reality of the world, which is IT is driving business today. It is a competitive difference, and the business wants to take advantage of that competitive advantage. And they're either going to do it with the internal IT because the internal IT is aligned with them, or they're going to go find someone in some sort of IT shop that will do it for them. And that's the reality of the world, and why we've seen, what is so nicely termed shadow IT, which I really would call business-led IT at this point.
Yeah, that idea of if I'm not being serviced, then I'll go and find somebody who will service my requirements and my needs.
There's a lot of fast food shops in the world. If I'm not getting a taco here, I can drive 3 miles and get another taco.
But can you make shells like Joseph Griffiths? I don't know.
You know what? The sad thing is, my desire to be incredibly efficient on making the best shells in the world is actually the exact same paradigm that we've just been talking about, right?
Oh, yeah.
Are my shells a competitive advantage that cause customers to come and eat there the way Joseph Griffiths makes them? The answer is no, they weren't. And in my optimization and efficiency desires to make that better, are those things going to make anything better for my company? Are they going to reduce costs? Am I going to leave 5 minutes earlier because I think no? So ultimately, it was a great effort in Joseph Griffiths doing what Joseph Griffiths enjoys doing and keeping his job interesting, but it failed to drive any real value to my business. And this is the problem we have with IT, is that they're focused a lot of things that they think are good things to be doing, optimizing the environment. But if it doesn't have an impact to the business, it's ultimately not where they should be spending their time if they want to continue to be part of the business.
Now, I remember a story you told at a Dallas-Fort Worth Spice Corps meeting about applying some of those same automation tactics to your role when you were, just an IT administrator, right? I think you said you had automated a certain percentage of your tasks and showed your boss, and it kind of blew his mind.
Yeah. So I think you just brought up a really good career tip. So I'll do like a politician and waylay you, and then I'll answer that question. So one thing that is incredibly uncomfortable for me has been public speaking. I think that's true of a lot of IT professionals. It's not the place that they're incredibly comfortable. And so for me, I started out by going to my local VMUG and saying, guys, I want to try doing a 30-minute presentation or a 15-minute presentation on some topic. And it was so uncomfortable and so not normal. And I just totally messed that thing up, right? But I decided I'm going to keep going back and I'm going to get better at it. So every time I get an opportunity to do a presentation, this year I've done a couple SpiceWorks local meetings. I've spoken at VMworld. I've spoken at a couple of VMO user cons. I spoke at VMworld this year and last year. I've had the opportunity to do a lot of speaking stuff, and that skill set wasn't developed by reading books. It was developed by putting myself out there and failing infinitely and recording myself and seeing how I failed and disliking how I looked and deciding I'm going to change things and just practicing over time and being willing to be uncomfortable. So, a little bit of a career tip. That's super uncomfortable for just about everybody in IT, including me. And really the only way to get better at it is by doing. So get out there and start doing. And everybody that's listening to you is just as scared as you are when they get up there. Trust me. They find ways to make it fun for themselves. They find ways to twist it for themselves. So back to the story you were talking about, one of the things that I did was I automated a methodology. We had a system where we were doing storage expands, and we would expand storage. And this process is we would realize that the storage was running out, and we would ask the storage administrators to expand the backend LUN, and then we'd have to go rescan it and expand it in VMware, and then we would go close the ticket. Basically, I automated everything except for the storage administrator's job because they didn't want that automated in a series of small steps. And what it would do is it open a ticket for the storage administrator for them to do their job, and then when they close the ticket, it would go verify that they did what was asked, and then it would go expand it and do the whole work and basically save us about 2 to 4 hours a day of a single person's job. It got huge amount of kudos from the business because I could immediately say the person that was doing this 2 hours is now available to do something else. We had some sort of measurable, some sort of KPI to work on, which is something that you would think that people that are into technology are really good at, which is measurements. But you have to have those measurements come back and say, and we can staff one less person on the weekends because of it. And that's really where the value starts to come out of. That's tying it back to the business.
That's so interesting. I think a lot of people are always worried about automating themselves out of a job, right? But I think that it's kind of a false fear, as if they're sitting around and I don't know, maybe I was, I hope I wasn't the only person who just had like 60 hours of work and I was trying to figure out how to do it in 40, right? And so if I could recover 10 hours of my week, I wasn't going to get fired because of that. So it's a false fear, isn't it?
Yeah. So I like to think of the journey of manufacturing automation as a parallel here, right? When they got to the point where they brought in robotics, actually the robotics employed almost 10 times the people that were employed in the auto factories. Now, not all of those people were working for Ford or for Nissan or one of those companies. A lot of them were working for the robotics companies, building the robotics that were doing it. But there were a fair number of high-paying jobs servicing the robotics. I think the same kind of paradigm shift is happening in IT, where we need to get out of the process of being focused on the things that are truly commodity, like what kind of compute server you use, or replacing hard drives inside of storage arrays. It's a commodity job. It really isn't something that we internally should be necessarily paying people to do or be doing anymore. We should be focused in things that are much closer to the value for the business. And it's the same thing with automation. We had the 10x number of people that were working in the auto plant or as part of the auto plant ecosystem after we put the robotics in. We also produced 15 times the amount of vehicles when that happened, right? So we were able to get more done, and people were focused in doing more interesting, higher paying jobs. So do I think that, automation is going to make our jobs go away? If you find a lot of value in replacing hard drives, then yes, I do, right? If you find a lot of value in doing those manual tasks, your job is going to go away. If you're willing to adapt and change, no, your job's just going to get better, because you're not going to be focused on things that keep you up in the middle of the night. You're going to be focused on things that automatically fix themselves in the middle of the night.
Yeah, I think that if we, dive into that, VMware administrator job, I think those people aren't worried about not having to replace disk drives. I think what they're worried about is, VMware, the installation of VMware vSphere, the hypervisor, is now automated. And if something goes wrong with it, the remediation is automated. So what is it that I do? But again, I think that that's kind of a false fear, right? If you're spending all your time doing installations and remediations, you're actually not adding value to the organization. Everything that is of value to the organization is after VMware's up and running and stable.
Yeah, and maybe it's a misperception, because I think in a lot of cases we might think, okay, well, this is how I add value, and maybe I didn't realize how easy it is to automate this, or that I could. I know that sounds silly, but if your eyes haven't been opened, so to speak, then you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways that story that we started out with from VMworld was an eye-opening experience for me. To your point, Nick, of opening your eyes.
Whoa. Okay. So sorry to leave you on this cliffhanger, but if you want to hear the conclusion to that story and interview, come back and listen to next week's stunning conclusion to our Joseph Griffiths interview. But at any rate, come back and join us next week.
Man, I hope you didn't oversell it too. But it is a good second half. I mean, get your popcorn ready, folks. And I will say, there's one thing we can never oversell on this podcast, and that's the John White School of Mentoring. So if you're out there waiting in suspense to hear what Joseph Griffiths has to say, you can act now. DM at Nerd Journey on Twitter and take advantage of the John White School of Mentoring today. Just a reminder that we want people to subscribe and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you may be listening. We want to know if we're being helpful, and we're always looking for interesting questions to ponder. We're collectively on Twitter at Nerd Journey.
All right. Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at VJourneyman for Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.
And we are joined today. Okay, yeah. So I just totally blanked right away.
Take two.
I didn't write down anything that I said I was going to do. I didn't write it down. I just said it out loud.
We'll do live.
Okay,
we'll do it live.
I don't even know where I am, guys. So, I'm completely lost.